Good morning, folks, wherever you are out there. Welcome. You are listening to the Charge Life podcast. I am Joseph Barletta, and this is where we discuss EVs and all things EV charging. So glad you could pull over and park with us today. Let's get plugged in. Hey, look, today's episode's all about workplace charging perspective, what you need to know. You're going to love this one. Before we begin, today's episode is brought to you by Smart Charge America. Since 2007, Smart Charge America has installed tens of thousands of EV charging stations nationwide, and they can do the same for you today. Whether in the home, commercial, or service, let their team of expert installation specialists guide you to the best solution for your new electric car. After all, if you can't charge, you can't drive. Visit smartchargeamerica.com today to get started. Okay, subject matter for today's episode, workplace charging perspective, what you need to know. On today's episode, we did a joint venture exploration with special guest moderator, Mr. Casey Brown from Evolve Houston, and the one steering us all in the right direction, Mr. Michael Conklin with Ernst & Young. Some really insightful discussion here with a few major utility companies across America sharing some of their experience and perspective on workplace charging. I promise you guys are going to love this one. Go ahead and click the thumbs up icon below if you can, guys. According to the YouTubes and the algorithms, I don't know. It's pretty much AI at this point. Who knows how it works? But if you could go ahead and click the thumbs up icon, we'd really appreciate it.
My name is Casey Brown. I'm the president and executive director of Evolve Houston. Evolve Houston is a local nonprofit, and our mission is to accelerate EV adoption in the greater Houston region. And with that, I'll kick it over to Michael.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you, Joseph, for having us on the Charged Life podcast. I'm Michael Conklin, otherwise known as the EV Cowboy. I've worked in energy for about a little over 15 years. There's nothing that I want to do in life other than work on energy. And I've been working on electric vehicles for the past 5 years. When it comes to electric vehicles, I work on the E side of the EV. I work on the energy. How do we make these things run better? How do we enable them to support and work well with our infrastructure system? And how do we make the energy affordable? And workplace charging is one of the great ways to make charging for the EVs both more available and more affordable. And I'm really excited that we're here talking about it today.
Thanks, Michael. David, go ahead and introduce yourself.
So David Owen, CenterPoint Energy. I lead our electrification programs. I'm the manager of electrification and been in this role since 2010, before we even had EVs on the road. At that time, we were running non-road programs, working with the ports and the airports to electrify ground service equipment, and also ship to shore cranes at the ports, but also running a program to incentivize the adoption of electric forklifts, and more recently looking at refrigerated trailers. Along the last 13, 14 years, kept up with the light duty market and how we could help support that. More recently, I have just finished a project with our internal fleet where we've set out our strategy to electrify a certain percentage of our light duty fleet and some of our heavy duty fleet as well. And a lot of that, this discussion about electrifying our own fleet kind of morphs into the workplace charging discussion of how are you able to share that charging infrastructure or not? And so having wrapped up that project, we kind of led into an employee workplace charging strategy because we knew we had to have something separate from our fleet. And so that's kind of where we're at right now.
Excellent. Thanks, David, for being here with us today. Ken, we'll pass it on to you.
So Ken Cressman, I'm the business development manager for fleet electrification for Ameren, Missouri. And I'm also the vice president of the board of St. Louis Clean Cities organization. So I'm very much focused on accelerating EV adoption in the Midwest, in Missouri. I spend most of my time coaching businesses on how they can think about EVs, how to capitalize on EVs, and how to deploy them, and not just deploy them, but deploy them in very, very successful and cost-effective ways. And I think keeping your eye on purpose here is important, and really helping people take the long view and take the first right steps. I mean, getting any step is important, but getting off on the right step really sets the table for advancing electrification. And workplace charging is one of those things that, it's integral. You can't talk about EVs without talking about workplace charging. And frankly, I don't think it gets enough respect or support in the general population about, just how important workplace charging is. So, I'm really happy to be here. I do work for a utility, and one of the things I like to say to all my utility friends is that, hey, look, we have a vested interest in making sure that this transition happens in a successful and beneficial way that benefits everybody. And when it comes to workplace charging, I think utilities really need to lead the way, right? We need to be the embodiment of the change that we're trying to encourage in all of our other businesses that we support. And so we really play a pivotal role in showing our communities what workplace charging looks like going forward.
Thanks, Ken. Scott, we'll kick it to you.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Scott Barrios, and like David and Ken, I'm also part of a utility. So I'm part of Entergy. I manage our electric mobility portfolio there throughout Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. I'm part of our integrated customer organization, and I lead our customer-facing strategy programs, everything from fleet electrification, public charging, multi-unit dwelling, really just focus on really making customers successful when it comes to all things electric vehicles, and at the same time working to prepare the grid for what's coming with electric vehicles as well too, because it's not a question of if anymore, it's when they're coming. So utilities have that regulated responsibility to provide affordable, reliable, accessible power. And we look at that accessible power, that includes workplace charging, coaching employees, making sure we can have good programs, again going back to that, making them successful. Like Ken, I'm also very involved with our Clean Cities coalitions. I'm the president of the board of Louisiana Clean Fuels, which is the U.S. Department of Energy Clean City Coalition in Louisiana, focused on advocating for alternative fuel transportation, throughout the state. I'm also an EV driver, so I'm a user of workplace charging. So I know what it's like to work at a large employer such as Entergy with over 11,000 employees, trying to develop a workplace charging policy, strategy, infrastructure, worried about will a charger be at the office when I need it, when I'm traveling around, because I drive all over the place with my EV and go to a lot of different offices with workplace charging. So I have a good firsthand understanding of what it takes to make sure we have a good, successful program.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott.
Hey, folks, Joseph Barletta here, founder and CEO of Smart Charge America, a Texas-based corporation focusing exclusively on the installation of EV charging infrastructure for the home, commercial, and service. We're the guys in the field actually putting these chargers in the ground. We're headquartered out of Austin, Texas, with satellite offices in 30 of our top EV-friendly cities across America. I do drive an EV to work every day, as our headquarters office does supply workplace chargers for our employees. So yeah, I guess I'm not only a president, but I'm also a client. It's horrible. Tough crowd. Smart Charge America is extremely passionate about coaching businesses and employers to further their sustainability initiative in offering workplace charging, which can be a huge benefit for employers and not only attracting, but also retaining top talent. So I'm very much excited and looking forward to the discussion. I mean, I'll tell you guys, my story here is when we were looking for a new headquarters, a part of our negotiating in the lease contract with the property management agency was to say, hey, look, we want charging stations not only in the back of our facility, but also in the front, back for our fleet and front for, our workplace charging. And so we actually negotiated those terms inside our actual lease deal when we came up to actually get our new office, and a part of the TI that the landlord was willing to give us with regards to renovating the unit. We kind of liked the office space as it was. So we really didn't need too much TI. I spent like $60,000 towards my TI on putting the charging stations in the front to be able to offer, my employees. And we charge some of our fleet in the back, and then also, kind of the sales fleet up in the front. And so that was a really good solution to be able to put these charging stations in the ground for literally like no cost. Let the property management, company actually get in there. It is a part of the TI, so it is making the building a lot more, progressive and a lot more attractive to other tenants, in the actual complex. And so that was one of the kind of unique tricks that we went ahead and sought after, and it actually worked. I mean, I've never put electric car charging inside of my TI when I was renting my other properties, but I managed to not only get the language put into my new lease agreement, but also the TI for our workplace charging. So little things like that, believe it or not, can actually kind of get the movement running a little bit faster. But of course, businesses, they typically tend to move, but most of them are, large businesses. They own their own buildings, so forth and so on. So they may not have enough, flexibility as we had, but it is an option. It is definitely an option. I wanted to share that story with you guys too. So,
Joseph, in there you mentioned TI a number of times. What is TI for the uninitiated?
TI is tenant improvement. So whenever a landlord is looking to lease their unit out, especially in a business complex, they will offer a certain amount of TI, which is allocated cost of construction. Like we'll give you $70,000 or $100,000 towards your construction, and we'll also offer you 2 months free rent. Like whatever negotiations they're trying to do to hurry up and get you in to sign that 5, 7, 10-year lease, because they want they want that business, and so they work with you on that end. So it's tenant improvement is TI. Sorry.
Joseph, would you also be able to say anywhere in there? I imagine you've done workplace charging for others as well. Yeah. Is there any insights you can share about, like, how much you've seen, or what are some of the things, if you agree that what you hear going around the table are some of the things people struggle with, or some other things that they struggle with? Not trying to get too far ahead of other questions, but I think some of the insights in there would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I think it's all about the employers and the business sustainability initiative. The business itself has to have a really strong sustainability initiative, or it's just going to fall apart. I mean, David had mentioned it before on his thing. Like, you have to have that real strong initiative and
Right.
backing in order for it to actually, I guess, give way, because you're going to initially start with the first footsteps into this workplace charging program. It's going to be like a little baby, and then it's going to start to grow and grow and grow as this thing gets wildly crazy. And it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. But you as an employer, you have to be able to, think about this stuff ahead of time, put in, pricing plans and, charging policies and all of that good stuff. But overall, I think it starts with the fundamental, like the CEO. It starts from the top down. It starts to, like, that is sustainability initiative. If that's not strong, everything else is going to be lost, because the budgeting that coincides with actually putting these charging station in, it's not like we'll get a vending machine or a snack machine. It's a pretty good cost, to put these charging stations in. And so if you can do that on a pre-construction side when you're building your new headquarters, then great, you're going to save about 90%, of the cost to put these things in. But a good majority of our businesses out there, it's all post-construction. It's already built. And so these are, kind of after the fact, these workplace, employers, they're going to have to start really getting on board and start budgeting themselves accordingly. And when you have a budget set and your initiative is strong, anything's, accomplishable, for that end. So those are the ones that we actually see the workplace chargers actually come to fruition and actually move forward. Most of the time, businesses, they'll come to us and they're trying to figure out how much is this stuff's going to cost, and then we hit them with a pretty good sticker shock, but we try to basically give them a little bit of a range budget ahead of time, so that way it's not so much of a sticker shock. But when they do, it's like, if their initiative is strong, they're going to be like, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. If it's lacking, they're just going to kick it down the road and possibly, not really, we'll put it in next year's budget, so forth and so on. So that's what we're seeing. It depends on the initiative, the green initiative and the sustainability initiative of the company itself, but it also has to work from top down, and everyone has to be on board. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
It does. And I think that 2 points that will be particularly valuable when you were talking about, so the need to have a strong initiative, I think that's good. I think that understanding the size of the cost, like you said, that there was some sticker shock. I think helping people understand, like, what does that sticker shock look like? And then also your point about what are some of the things that can be done to lower those costs and make it be done more affordably. I think that that's all going to be really valuable things for people who listen to this, trying to get their heads around, like, how do I do this well? Like, can I do it? Can I do it well? So good, really good stuff. A little while back, I talked to Casey and Joseph and said, hey, we should do a podcast on workplace charging, on an employee workplace charging. And it was a surprise, I'll be quite honest, to me that I was even saying that, because the only reason why I thought that, if we rewound a month, I would have thought, like, how much is there really to talk about? Like, workplace charging, what, you put some chargers on a wall, right? How hard can it be? But then I had, I work at EY serving clients who are doing all kinds of things with chargers. And it turned out that there was a need that I hadn't seen there before for help with workplace charging. There were a lot of questions to be answered. Out of that, I went and I talked to 10 different companies about their workplace charging programs, trying to understand what's working and where all of this is going. And through that, I understood that there are some real questions. Like it's not as easy as it thinks. And starting out thinking that it's easy is actually a good way to find yourself with some unpleasant surprises along the way. So the inspiration for this podcast was that, and the conversation that I had with Casey and Joseph about it. And so we wanted to bring on some people who could help tell their stories about how they have either run their programs, designed their programs, or are building their programs. Or in the case of Joseph, all of the ways that they are helping customers be successful with these workplace charging programs. Because as you said, Ken, it doesn't get enough love, including from me until about a month or two ago. The gap between what the Department of Energy says we need for workplace charging and how much this is discussed is wide. We had the workplace charging challenge back in 2014. We all agreed it was really important back then, and then we don't even talk about it anymore unless you read the occasional NREL or DOE paper. So with that, that I just wanted to set that as like sort of the why for this podcast. Like, why are we here talking about workplace charging? And the fact is that there are a lot of questions that people don't realize that they're going to get into until they start trying to do this. And so with that, Ken, I want to start with you, just because you talked about some of the things that you focus on, helping people have successful programs with a long-term view. So if you could share a little bit about, why are you here talking about workplace charging? How does this fit into what you do on a daily basis? Just kind of share your story there.
So thanks. So yeah, I'm obviously an EV advocate and an EV driver myself, and I've been following EVs actually for quite a long time, going back to probably about the 6th grade. But before I even worked for the utility, I had some exposure to a facility, an organization that was putting in workforce charging, workplace charging, and they were doing so, frankly, just because funds became available, right? And they put them in, and it filled up, really quickly. Not necessarily a surprise to me, but it was obvious surprise to them, and actually it became a little bit of a limited resource and a little bit of a hot topic. And the management's like, well, who knew? And a lot of us knew, right? It just wasn't widely accepted. And it turns out that the facility manager at the location had been actually been charging on site with a special plug tied to a gate for, I don't know, probably a decade, as far as I know. And there were a bunch of people, frankly, waiting for workplace charging, and it was what tipped him over the edge and had him start driving a vehicle, especially some of the younger coworkers that, frankly, don't have a place to charge, right? So, I think that kind of snowballed into a little bit of icing where people park internal combustion engine vehicles in front of charging spots out of animus, and I think really for me it pointed to that workplace charging really kind of sits at the nexus of this transition, because it is both a highly visible statement, right? And a very effective way of communicating why it is we are doing what we're doing. And at the same time, it's also a very effective enabler where there is a significant portion of our population that frankly will be blocked out from electrification if they don't get workplace charging. So, obviously we're on a transition here, and you can't be all things to everybody at all times. But, one of the most important things I think in workplace charging is defining what your overarching purpose and goal is, and understanding that and being very clear with that, and building the buy-in from a broad level of everyone in the organization, and creating space for people to actually talk about it instead of just throwing some chargers up and then letting the melee follow, right? So I think that's kind of an important piece to it, because as we talk about this transition, a lot of people's first exposure is going to be workplace charging, and how that handles has a ripple effect on how it's going to work throughout the rest of the community.
Scott, you are working with folks through the work that you mentioned, Louisiana Clean Fuels, on things like workplace charging, and sort of addressing through collaboration, figuring out how to do these things well. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways, and going back to what kind of Ken was saying on the why employers want to do this. And I think one kind of other interesting aspect to this is worth kind of discussing on the why we're seeing, both from Entergy's perspective as a utility and Louisiana Clean Fuels. Obviously, there's a lot of employee benefits, things like that, showing commitment to employees, showing public commitment. But I want to talk about the environmental side of this as well, too. Two aspects of it. One, scope 3 emissions, right? So when I'm using the term scope 3 emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, scope 1 being what that facility, what that entity is actually, whatever they're doing for their direct business, the emissions that they release. So in the transportation sector, right, it's their own fleet, delivering goods, whatever it may be, that's their scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 is how their energy is produced. So really that's us as the utility. How do we produce our electricity, transmit, distribute our energy to them? And that's their scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are wide. It's basically any indirect emissions associated with that building. So in this case, even how their employees get to work is considered a scope 3 emission. So what you're seeing kind of in the market right now, there are kind of, whether it's carbon reduction strategies, the carbon marketplace, requirements to report scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but you're starting to see a lot of big companies start doing voluntary reporting for their scope 3 emissions as well too, whether it's to Wall Street for investment or for some type of cap and trade program, whatever it may be. So there's this interest on how can we lower our scope 3 emissions at the site, and that includes workplace charging for employees is one way to do that, right? To encourage, go back to the encouraging employers to put in workplace charging. The other aspect to this, if you're familiar with the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED certification program, which is the leadership in energy and environmental design programs, there's different certification levels that buildings can get to show that they are a green facility. So it's kind of a bragging right that a lot of companies look at, like, hey, we are a leader in a green energy. A lot of it's, energy efficiency of your heating, cooling system, lights, etc. But also they can get points for putting in EV chargers. So workplace charging is a great way to get points towards your LEED certification as well too. So I kind of want to focus on that why from the environmental perspective, because I know everyone's going to be talking so much about the human resources perspective and that outward commitment. So I just want to kind of make sure we showcase that a little bit too.
David, so you've been working with EVs and all, like you're the original gangster of EVs in my and you are currently working on an employee workplace charging, and you've seen iterations of what look like initiatives towards this, right? And so you've been firsthand involved with iterations of trying to get something like this off the ground. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey to deliver some insight into what are the, I'm not trying to dive into the specific challenges, but just a high level view of, like, what does it look like when you're trying to do this, and where do the bumps in the road tend to come up?
Yeah, let me go back to what you started with, the DOE Workplace Charging Challenge back in 2014. As a result of that challenge, all three of us utilities are members of the Edison Electric Institute, EEI. They're our policy arm in Washington, D.C. We developed a team to look at developing what we called a cookbook of how you do workplace charging. And one of the reasons why we did that was because as utilities, we wanted to lead by example. And so in that cookbook, we came up with different ways of doing the workplace charging, but also looking at assessing where the charging infrastructure would need to be, doing ride and drives, and then training your employees. And then the other thing, really, you talk about leading by example, is using that program to develop your employees as EV ambassadors. So if they're driving an EV and they're plugging in at work, and they're going home and telling their friends and family the benefits of driving EV and how much better of a drive it is. But so coming out of that document that we created at EEI, we sought to develop a small program for workplace charging, and what I'd call a soft launch of an EV program. We didn't really broadcast it company wide, but we mainly focused on our Houston market, which is where our large electric utility is. And we came up with a budget to put some charging infrastructure into the field. Now, at this time, we had some fleet electric vehicles. The Chevy Volts were mainly what we had. So not a whole lot of EVs, but we saw an opportunity to put in some charging infrastructure, allow our fleet to use it, but also allow employees to use it. And these were non-network chargers. So there wasn't any way of tracking it or charging a fee. There was just a handful of employees that were able to use that at the time. And now that we have expanded the employee adoption, EV adoption, it started to become an issue, though, because now we had too many people wanting to plug in. And then also the fairness issue comes in, as far as ICE vehicles versus EVs. And so I'm sure we'll get more into that as we go along.
Just for the sake of the listener who doesn't know what you're talking about, what is the ICE versus EV question?
Yeah, so as a you'd get people with an ICE combustion engine vehicle wanting the company to provide free gasoline, because this employee is getting free electricity for their vehicle. And one thing I should say about that soft launch of our program, one of the things I would do, I managed it, and that was another issue that it gets too big for one person to manage. But at the time, we would have the person that wanted to charge at the company facility, they would fill out a form and give me their address where they live. And so I kind of had an idea of how much electricity they were using, as long as they were charging at home, because that was one of the requirements. Is like I asked people, just don't come in empty. This is here to top off your commute. And in the case of a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, it really helped extend their number of miles. So so that it worked well at that point.
Very good. Joseph, you're helping a lot of different companies, with their workplace charging programs. I can't even imagine how many. And you've heard, Ken, Scott, and David talk about some of the things that they've, look for to make a program successful, some of the bumps in the road that you got to deal with. What are some of the key questions that you get from people when they want to start a workplace charging program, and how do you address those questions and help them be successful?
We have a kind of an acronym, and we call it T-MAN. So it's horrible, I know. T-MAN. So it's time, money, authority, and need, right? So we're trying to figure out, that's the way we approach all businesses that are looking to go workplace charging. We're trying to figure out, okay, well, what's your time base? Like how fast are you trying to get this in? And then also, like, what's your budget? Okay, like how much are you looking to spend? And then, overall, like, are you the person that's going to be able to make the decision here? Because if not, I'm going to have to repeat myself several times over and over and over. And I really want to get the people that are involved in making the decision in the actual room. So that way everyone's holistically, like, everyone's on board. Everyone knows the initiative that the employer or the business is trying to achieve. And of course, what are your needs? How many chargers are you looking for? Are you looking for fleet charging, like David was talking about? Are you looking just to provide employee-based, charging? These are very, very, they may be the same, but they're extremely different. One of the hardest things with workplace charging, as you all know, most of your electrical panels, all of your electrical systems inside the workplace is generally towards the back of the building, not towards the front. Every now and then we'll warm up and we'll get lucky and it's right there in the front and we're like, yeah, let's just tap in and do it. But a majority of the time it's always in the back. And so by rearing that pushing and pulling that electric power from the back to the front to supply the workplace charging, that's a feat in itself. And so if we can get in on the early stages, especially if the building's just being built for the headquarters and for the business, if we can do some of that construction on the groundbreaking side of things, we have the potential to really save around 90% of the construction costs to be able to pull that those lines towards the front and make that dream possible for the actual employers. But overall, that T-man is something that I really want to have businesses, have employers start thinking about whenever you're approaching that topic. Start thinking about, your timeline, what's your money, what's your budget, and get the people in the room. We talked about coming from top down. Make sure that the people in the room that are going to be the authority figures and making that decision are on board, and then also start thinking about what your needs are. Generally, what we've seen is employers, they'll jump in and they maybe do 4 workplace chargers right in the front, but they also have to compete with like ADA, handicap, spaces, so forth and so on. So sometimes parking's a little tight, but otherwise, that's what they're up against. But we always try to tell them, whenever you're putting in 4, go ahead and start planning for future proofing as well as scalability, because like David said, it starts with 4 and then it becomes the musical chairs and everyone's wanting the charging stations, and so you have to be able to have the flexibility for expansion over time. And so as long as you go into it knowing that, I think you'll be in tip-top shape. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I got timeline, money, authority, and need. And of those, one of the things that I can say that I've certainly seen is people don't know what their need is, right? That can be a challenge. And so being able to find somewhere where you can get some data to help inform, how many people you might actually have charging can be really helpful, and also understanding what that's going to look like in 5 years, so that understand that your installation today might not match your installation 5 years from now. By the way, I just wanted to say, if we could get some like a T-Man t-shirt up on the Charged Life merch store, I think that'd be fantastic. I'll be buyer number 1.
So hey Michael, one of the things that we talked about that was really interesting to me in planning for this was the challenges, and I know we touched on some of them, and I love the structure that Joseph outlined for us, and I really want to go back to Joseph here as we kind of recirculate this concept or the topic of what do you see as the key challenges in successfully running an employee workplace program? At Evolve Houston, we see the success of that, especially early on, as setting a benchmark and setting the tone for many people's first experiences, as we've kind of chatted about. So, Joseph, with that, can you help us understand some of the challenges specifically to being successful here?
Ultimately, it's the price, that you're willing to your pricing plan, essentially. Like for the chargers that I have in the front of our headquarters, I only charge my employees the cost at which it costs me for the electricity. So if we're at 9 cents a kilowatt here, I'm only charging my employees 9 cents a kilowatt. I'm not making any money off of it. However, the charging stations are open to the public as well. We have 12 of them, in front of our building. And so if any non-employee comes and charges at our charging stations, well, it's about 17 cents a kilowatt. And so if you're a business and you're trying to make a business case off of charging for your employees, like it's not, you're not really going to be there, because they may have a cheaper rate at home, and they're going to charge in the home. But David had mentioned it. This is not used for a primary means of charging. This is meant for complementary. It's the top off model, right? It's just to extend that electric usage, especially if you have a hybrid, to be able to, facilitate your travels around town. But I would say the one of the demand things that we've seen is the pricing at which you set for your employer based, charging plan. So if your price is too high, then you're not going to have that many people, charging, because they're just going to charge at home, no problem. If it's low and you're giving them a really good deal, you're going to be exercising that a lot more. So it is pendant on, I guess, contingent on that pricing plan that you ultimately set up. But David could talk a little bit more about the wait list, or maybe some of the charging etiquette, or some of the charging policies that he actually has within the program. Those really start to stack up, layer on layer. But ultimately, that's what we're seeing. Generally, like David had talked about, the level 2 dumb chargers, they don't charge anything, so it's free. And when we see that, that's really when you start, incentivizing employees to come in and actually charge, because the company is not interested in making money off of it. I'll tell you, on the fleet side, the fleets are actually, a majority of the fleets, they want the dumb chargers, because they have all this stuff calculated. They understand the whole pool. They don't need a fancy, integrated smart charger. They don't need to monetize the charging. They just need to be able to supply it as fast and as cheap as possible to their fleet, because overall they're looking to get their fleet costs down with it when it comes to operations. But the pricing plan on the employee side of things, especially if you planning on making it open to the public, you have to really start thinking about that price, and what maybe the average price of per kilowatt is at their home, and then what you're going to charge your employees. I only felt that I wanted my employees to have a little skin in the game, so they knew that, hey, look, we're taking care of you. You're getting the much cheaper rate that you'll find anywhere else. But unfortunately, I can't give this away for free. I have to be able to cover my costs to it. Now, at some point, hopefully we're making, a lot of money later on in the future, and I may change that policy. But for now, it was a little bit more of a skin in the game. So that way they definitely appreciate it, which by all means, we've actually seen that type of pricing policy kind of curb the demand to where we're not always just sitting here rotating cars in and out of those parking spaces. It's a nice even flow as the day curves. And so I'm scared David may be able to lead to this more. If I go and just give it away for free, it's going to be wild, wild west, and everyone's just going to be coming in, left and right. So you have to be cautious about where you set your pricing plan for your employee-based charging program. So hope that helps.
And that Joseph said too, that's really important too, is the type of charger lets you set different pricing based on variables, right? So you can set different pricing programs depending on the type of charger for someone from the public, your employees, based on kind of their profile when they log on through their app or use an RFID card. So like there's a lot of flexibility there for the way you program the charger for different pricing models there. And in as a utility, I just want to make sure commercial rates for electricity are usually cheaper than residential rates as well too. But it's sometimes a little more complicated because you might have demand charges and things like this. But yeah, overly commercial rates are going to be cheaper than they were going to pay for residential rates as well too.
Yeah, but I would just want to point out, Joseph, you're an advanced user, right? Like you're pretty advanced. Much of the market is really at the very beginning, right? And I think there's an important consideration here, which is there's a cost associated with the ability of charging. And I don't mean electricity, I mean charging for charging, right? And that cost can sometimes stack up to be beyond the cost of the electricity that's flowing through the energy. So in some instances, a quote unquote dumb level 2 charger, it is actually the most cost effective way. And I think, think back to your university days, like a lot of, we all went to school, right? We all had a parking pass, right? We all paid for that parking pass, right? So there are very pragmatic ways of doing cost recovery of energy if the accounting team within the organization isn't capable or able to give quote unquote give the electricity away. So you don't necessarily have to jump into a higher cost, higher orchestrated, or your employees are paying you a bill, and now you got to somehow add a line item with your accounting team, and all of that creates a hurdle. And what I would suggest is that for a lot of organizations, they don't really need to do that. I mean, there is an etiquette piece to this, of course, and hopefully we'll talk about that later on. But from just a functionality standpoint, putting up a bank of level 2 chargers that are moderately sized and allowing your employees access to it. And if you need to do some cost recovery, sell a sticker, it's premium parking, and that costs nothing to do. And now you're enabling your employees and you're getting all the benefits without the vampire loads or the extra costs associated with transactions.
Yeah, one thing if I can add to be cautious about that, because that is one of the things we're thinking about. Just have access control and charge a gym membership. $10 a month, $15, whatever. That's easy. If you get too much demand, though, you have 20 vehicles showing up for 5 charging stations, and they've all paid $10. Then it becomes a right. So you have to really be careful on how you size your installation if you go down that path.
Yeah. One thing I'll add too on the topic of like just challenges, right? and I'm sure a lot of other utilities and large employers have the same problem, is we operate across 4 different states and have hundreds of different offices. Not all of our offices have the same ownership kind of model. Like we lease some offices, we own some. We operate anything from power plants to like a small service center or warehouse to a corporate building. Some of those offices are leased. Some of the parking garages are leased. Sometimes the employee enters into some type of agreement with a local parking garage to park there. So that's one challenge is in our policy wide is not every employee is going to basically have the same type of access because we don't own the facility. And then you have to enter into some type of agreement with the landlord or the parking garage operator to put in chargers. So it's just one thing to be aware of. There's a lot of creative solutions. I know we're going to get into this a little later, but it's something to be aware of too when you're considering workplace charging is what is my footprint and who actually owns the property.
The topic of pricing, is something that came up. We just talked a little bit about it. And I mentioned the work that I'd done when I just recently spoke with these 10 different companies, workplace charging programs. And I'll tell you that most of them were giving away charging for free. And all of them saw that as not being the future. That was not a sustainable program. Having additional revenues not only sent a price signal that encouraged responsible usage, but also helps fund the needed growth of the program. David, you talked about the gym membership and how that can create the perception that there's a right. And I think anytime you say that something is free, you've created a situation where there's basically almost a limitless demand for it, which to your point, Joseph, about the budget, that affects your budget. So if you charge for something, you need to provide less of it. If you give it away for free, people start like psychologically building it into their business case when they buy an electric vehicle. And now they're really unhappy because now they actually can't charge. So, one of the things that we looked at is, going back to what David said in his etiquette program, this is your top up. This is a convenience source of charging. This is not your primary source of charging. What's going to happen if you make it free? You just signed up to be everybody's primary source of charging because it went into the business case, went into the Excel sheet. If you charge at least the same price as electricity at home, now it's the same price as at home. It's a convenience source. And right there, you can help eliminate some of the challenges. And now beyond that price of home charging, anything you want to take it up, we'll just play with your demand there. But I think that's what we heard from others is that what they're trying to provide is a convenient source. And so on this pricing question, giving it away free, it's great, but one way to do that, because you're trying to stimulate demand in the early phases, but a good way to do that is to say, hey, this has a price, but we're doing a temporary promotion because we're trying to encourage this. And then everybody understands it sunsets and you get the right kinds of behaviors, people expecting that this is a convenience, not, this is where I'm going to charge every day. Because I literally hear people say that, like, hey, I bought an electric vehicle because I get free charging at work. And I'm like, that is going to be rough.
Michael, I might follow up with that though. It's not necessarily a convenience for everyone. And I think you're right. I would encourage everybody to think about this energy transition in a holistic way where the entire population gets to transition and not just those of us that can charge at home. And so, when I think about workplace charging, at least in my opinion, because we are still in the early adopter phase, right? It's still about accelerating adoption. That is why you do it today. In addition to all of the things that Scott mentioned, right? There's real benefits. There's real carbon footprint benefits. There's real employee retention benefits. There's real benefits in a lot of different ways, but you're trying to accelerate adoption today. That's the overarching purpose, right? And then those same tools can be used differently later on, and you can move forward through this transition. So you begin with accelerating adoption, then you move into, facilitating ease of use, but eventually workplace charging becomes essential. There's a significant portion of our population that live in urban environments or multifamily environments they park on street parking. They own their own house, but they've got on street parking, that will not be able to drive an EV, at least not conveniently, without workplace charging. And so at some point in time, there's a switch here that starts to, and there's a prioritization of access that'll happen. But that's many, many years down the road. Right now, we're still in the accelerated adoption phase.
Yeah, again, that part of the equation though too on pricing, that example you use about multifamily, they do have an option. They do have public charging, supercharging, fast charging, but that gets to be quite a bit more expensive to do. So it doesn't really help them with their economics. So that's where I think an employee workplace charging can really help benefit that 1/3 of the population in our market, for example, to drive an EV. We're starting to see some multifamily units put in charging infrastructure, but it's going to take a while to get to a mass where multifamily just includes it as part of their facility.
I love what's being brought out here, right? There's a story to this. There's this long-term nature to this. But I almost want to ask, each of you, Joseph got experience directly on both ends of this. David's, pioneered a program before. Ken, you've brought up this concept of long-term, and I'm just kicking over to Scott here. Do we see a lot of these companies collaborating in this space today? I mean, you kind of this long-term view. Are we all swinging in the dark, or are we working together?
Well, I know from our perspective from Entergy, right? Like we look at ourselves to be a trusted energy advisor for our customers. They're using our energy. It's not to the point where a lot of the utility model of, well, we're just provide electricity to ratepayers. That's kind of changed, right? We really want to get to understand how our customers are actually using the energy we're providing, because our motto at Entergy is we power life. That's changing. It's like as people rely on in their lives to us to provide electricity to drive their vehicles, that's constantly evolving what that we power life it really means. So one of the reasons why, like when we do it ourselves, right, we have a couple dozen workplace chargers at a couple dozen different facilities around our footprint. Really, it's what we do is like, okay, what do we learn from here? How do we advise our customers on this, right? How can we turn around, provide lessons learned? Who are some other stakeholders in this area, such as Evolve Houston? What we're learning from other utilities, our Clean Cities coalitions. We participate in a couple regional EV working groups, and we had one really recent listening session on workplace charging, where a bunch of major employers kind of in Southeast Louisiana came together and kind of just shared lessons learned, share from each other, and not everyone's on the same page. Like it's, well, what did the IRS say about this? What's going on here? What does this really mean? What are some good chargers so it's really kind of a very collaborative area. And I think there's a lot more collaboration that could go together, but at this point it's so early on. I think the great example is like, well, we had this great roadmap and what we're going to go. There's a lot of great resources in here. I know we're going to talk about later, but there's a lot to still learn from each other as we still go through this kind of messy middle that we're in right now. With workplace charging.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges. One of the things that I didn't foresee as a challenge here was, Joseph talked about authority, and I did come to understand through my work with clients wanting to do workplace charging that there's some ambiguity about who owns a workplace charging program, particularly in a utility. Because at utilities, they have a fleet that's probably being electrified. They have an EV group that's doing all things EV, and they've got a facilities group that owns and does everything facilities. And so I have a perspective on this that I got from talking to 10 different companies, and I don't want to say what it is, but I'd like to hear from the folks on the call if you have seen that same sort of ambiguity, or have you struggled with that? And what's your thesis on who owns a workplace charging program? So that's one question. Who owns a workplace charging program? Is it the same today and the same tomorrow, or is one group needed to do it today and then somebody else is going to own it 10 years from now? So with that, why don't I go to, I haven't heard you talk in a while, David, and I know you have perspective here. So what do you think? Nothing that'll get you in trouble.
Yeah. So I think part of that ambiguity starts with the fact that your subject matter experts are in your e-mobility, your transportation electrification groups. So the natural thought is, well, they should own that. But they really, they're really just that subject matter expert. You know, when it comes to putting in charging stations at a facility, you know, I lean towards the facility group needs to have that knowledge to do that. So it's fine to leverage the expertise of your e-mobility group. You know, if I was drawing this up on a king for a day, drawing this up on a sheet of paper, the ultimate thing to do for a facility was I need an expert within my facility group. And it doesn't just have to be, say, like an EV person, but it's more like an emerging technology. You know, we're all looking at putting solar, backup battery storage. You know, we have natural gas gen sets at a number of facilities. So really, I think where you'd ultimately want to get to is you have that one person or a handful of people on your facilities group that could help develop and manage a workplace charging program.
Because I got some thoughts there. So first off, I'd like to say that to any organization that has workplace charging today, they have it because there was an advocate within the organization, and those people deserve a lot of respect. The people that put in charging early on in Ameren are wonderful people, and they saw this early on, and there was a lot of struggles to get things in, right? And so I think every organization that has workplace charging deployed today, even though maybe sometimes it's suboptimal, it was a rough road to get it there, right? And I think we need to acknowledge that. And then when we and I think that's at every organization, not just utilities, right? It's at every organization. And then when we get to the ambiguity, again, the ambiguity occurs at every organization as well, even within fleet, right? And I think a lot of the ambiguity comes to that there's a misalignment, or not everybody has the same understanding. And so one team, might be, tasked with growth and acceleration, and another team might be tasked with efficiency and reduction of cost. And so, specifically with workplace charging, is it our goal to have the most cheapest chargers out there? Or is it our goal to create, what I like to call Disneyland, where it's a beautiful customer experience for the people doing it, and they rave about it, and they go to their home and they say, this is fantastic. Your employer should do it. And you bring other employers by, and they look and they're like, oh my God, that is great. We should do that too. And which one is it? And I'm not going to say one camp is right and the other one's wrong. They're both right based off of their views. But that's where I go back to, what is the definition of success for the organization? What phase are we in? What are we trying to achieve? And build towards that. Because you can change things later on, right? The connectivity of the property is not going to change. The user experience can change, and it can change dramatically based off of the type of charger and charge management system you deploy. So this is an evolution. It's not a once and done. And my opinion is very much around, let's find ways to enable the most people we can. And then later on we could talk about optimization.
Yeah, from my perspective, I definitely agree with everything David and Ken said too. And Michael, you hit it on the head. It's those three groups. It's facilities, it's fleet, and kind of the EV advocate, like in my role, the customer facing the EV team. We have a great relationship with our facilities group on doing this, but like I said earlier, like not all of our facilities is very for the facilities that we lease, they don't necessarily get involved. I mean, obviously they handle the lease agreements, but they're not going to we don't own the chargers there sometimes. In some cases, we do own chargers and lease facilities, and some the landlord provides chargers as part of the agreement. In some places, they're just there for any tenant in that garage to use. It's really kind of above all situation. It kind of depends. With the way I would approach workplace charging, I want to get more workplace charging. Whatever is the easiest route to get chargers in place for our workplace, it's kind of, I can pull different levers there, right, on ways we can enable that. One other interesting aspect from the utility that wasn't kind of mentioned, we don't allow our employees to use chargers that are for fleet vehicles. We have a small fleet of electric vehicles, right? There's multiple reasons we do that. We don't want to clog up chargers that are dedicated to fleet because they need them, right? That is our primary mission, to get those vehicles on the road. So we don't want to clog those up. Two, there are some special utility general accounting practices with rate recovered regulatory assets for fleet operations, now applying that to chargers, that's kind of a no-no. So taking that into consideration on how we account for fleet operations versus employee benefit is something that a utility has to look into consideration as well too. It's probably a lot of other businesses depending on how they're structured as well.
Joseph, thinking about T-Man, we're talking about authority here, right? So who are you working with typically in a successful program, one that's actually going to get launched? What is the department within the company who tends to be owning the workplace charging program? Is it different? Is it generally the same people? Interested in your experience as the guy who actually does the work.
Yeah, I mean, we coach up all of our sales team to know everything there is to know about each vertical when it comes to supplying, EV charging infrastructure, and workplace charging is a very formative, kind of vertical that we have each one of our sales agents know in depth, and so when it comes to like the authority, the people that we're talking to, most of the time, like the big corporations, they will own the building, so we know exactly who we're talking to. We don't have to have like permission from their property management company, whoever they're leasing to, but it is one of the questions that we ask during the vetting process. But then on the smaller size businesses, they're more likely to be leasing that building, and so when there is a leasing thing, we want to make sure that the building themselves, that the property management company has approved. The worst thing that we can do is have the business come out there, approve us to do the charging stations. We're doing the charging stations, and all of a sudden, the property management's like, you got to rip these out. We didn't give you guys permission to put these in. That's like the worst thing that could ever happen, because what's going to happen is the business isn't going to pay us for the work that we did because the property management said that they can't do it. So we always try to make sure that if they're renting or if they're leasing, to make sure that the property management company is involved. And that's a really good segue for us to be able to build a relationship with that property management company as well, to be able to offer any of their other buildings or any of their other companies that they have inside their portfolio the ability to do workplace charging. One of the things that since we're talking on a council of utility companies here, do utility companies offer any sort of, I guess, incentive-based tariffs or some sort of reduction rate program for incentivizing employers to actually put in workplace charging? Is there anything like that out there, you guys?
Yes, like for example, in energy, we do have specific EV tariffs in some of our jurisdictions and pending in others, mostly around demand charge limitation. But we also do offer rebates for people installing chargers, whether it's a commercial. We don't differentiate any type of commercial charger, but we have rebates available for the actual installation of the charger as well too. I know others have the same.
Ameren, Missouri has a program we refer to as Charge Ahead. We're nearing the end of it. Workplace charging, we separate it in buckets. Multifamily is a bucket, public charging is a bucket, and business, workplace, and fleet are a bucket. And actually, the workplace was the first bucket to be consumed. Businesses do see the value in this. They really do. There is a very, very good value here in doing this. So, and I think when we look across the nation, there are lots of different programs out there. I think, again, the goal is to create experiences and accelerate adoption that people wouldn't have otherwise. And then the back end of that is as we mature to provide an enablement, right, for those that couldn't charge someplace else. So, I think there's a really strong reason to do this. And then the one thing I would want to point out is that, most people are familiar with the duck curve, right? So, if vehicles are parked,
why don't you just explain the duck curve, since not everybody might be familiar with it?
Michael, I might let you describe it. You could probably do better than me, but as we go through an energy transition, the sun shines during the day, and so as the amount of solar power increases, there becomes actually an energy excess as the sun rises. And so if we again turn the timetable forward and look with a long range, the idea is that if vehicles are plugged in during the day at work, they're charging on renewable power. Whereas if they're plugged in during the night at home, perhaps that generation might come from another source. So there is a broad societal benefit of being able to charge vehicles. The beautiful thing about vehicles is that they can time shift. They can charge. They're a nice, wonderful square load that can charge across a wide range of time, and they can soak up the energy when it's available.
Yeah, and CenterPoint, we just launched a new rebate program in our energy efficiency group. It's a small rebate. We're actually looking at ways to increase that rebate to help drive more adoption. But that's something that it'll take a little while to get it. We're in a little bit of a different market than the other two, since we're in the deregulated ERCOT market, and the TDSP, which is what CenterPoint is, transmission distribution service provider, the wires company. We've been limited on what we can do in that space.
And just a plug too, so if anyone's interested in learning what type of rebates to have, one great resource is the U.S. Department of Energy's Alternative Fuel Data Center, AFTC. Go there and you can click on state by state, see all the tax credits, incentives, grants, laws, utility rebates are all in one place. Also, we mentioned the EEI earlier, Edison Electric Institute. They have a great on their website, and it's probably somewhere else too. Yeah, I know all of us have to do a quarterly update to them on every single rate program that we have that's consolidated across every utility in one location as well too.
So as we wrap up, we've talked about a lot here, and this topic is hot. It's certainly hot in the region that we support, and what I want to close us with in our discussion today is some words of wisdom. And so I'd like to kind of systematically go through the team, and Ken, I'll ask you to give us some words of wisdom as we close today.
Yeah, so I think it would be important for organizations to define what it is they're trying to accomplish, right? Number one, define your definition of success here. Number two, I would demystify charging, right? This is just an electrical project. It's not rocket science. This is achievable and doable. This is not, there's to demystify, there's nothing to be afraid of here. The other thing I would say is that, most organizations survey their employees on a regular basis about any number of things. Perhaps running a survey to your employees about, do they intend to purchase an EV, or what would be their preferences in how to use workplace charging might help guide you to designing a program that meets the needs of the employees. Because at the end of the day, you're doing this as an employee benefit. There are all kinds of business benefits, but if your employees aren't happy about it, it's not, you really kind of miss the target. So I would encourage organizations to survey their employees and take that feedback in earnest and design a program around what is really needed in your region.
Yeah, thank you. Scott, what would you leave us with as some words of wisdom?
Resources, learn from others, right? There's a lot of people who've done this already. There's a lot of great programs out there. I'll plug one more program. For example, I mentioned Louisiana Clean Fuels, who I'm the president of the board of. They were one of the founders of what's called the Empower program. This is a U.S. Department of Energy funded program that started last year, and it's about coaching employers to go and put in EV chargers. So they are engaging workplaces. They are, working with employers on coaching and getting them to sign pledges. Like they had over 650 employers around the U.S. sign the pledge for this. And then, it really is a catalyst to help, bring around that change for workplace charging. So it's workplacecharging.com is the website. So really can't get much simpler than that as a great resource there. But it talks about a lot of things we talked about: how to design a program, how chargers work, who to connect with, and even like find yourself a coach. As Joseph mentioned, Smart Charge America, Evolve Houston. There's a lot of coaches out there locally, other employers who've done this, Clean Cities Coalitions. Get out there, find resources, and make it happen.
David, what's your words of wisdom today?
I think it was said before, but just to reiterate, it starts at the top. You have to have that leadership of the company needs to be supportive of doing this. I mentioned at the start, I helped support our fleet electrification project. The key for that was we had the CEO was on board from the start, to the point where he was giving us suggestions on how we should look at different ways of electrifying our fleet. That's great to have them engaged like that. And then below that, we had an executive oversight committee and advisory committee, and then anybody who potentially would touch that project. Employee workplace charging is no different. You need that executive oversight, but then you need your facilities, perhaps fleet is involved in that as well. But having your organization involved in that and lined out with a plan to help make it successful.
Excellent. Joseph, what would you leave us with words of wisdom on this topic?
Look, I would just say not all sizes, I mean, you have a lot of flexibility in today's industry when it comes to charging stations. Not all programs are the same. There's a lot of flexibility. And so you have some sort of, some programs where you can actually like subscription based, employee based charging. You can go from capex to opex with your capital expenditures, as an employer. And there's also, look, this is not meant to be tax advice or investment advice, but there are a lot of tax based incentives that employers can grab a hold of while doing these, putting in these actual charging stations. So in addition to state utility incentives, there are actual tax benefits for a lot of employers, but I would absolutely suggest you guys do your own research before diving in. But like Scott had mentioned, you can go to those coaches out there. They know about this Alternative Fuels Database Center. I mean, they have all of this information there. You just have to tap into that resource and make it happen. So that's definitely what I'll leave everyone with. And I definitely appreciate everyone's time today in educating and coaching all of us up a little bit more on workplace charging. So
when Scott was talking about finding resources, look at just like us three at your local utility. Look to your local utility, just like what we're talking about. They are a great resource that they've probably thought about this. They've helped other customers do that.
Michael, before handing the mic off to you, one thing that I would echo that just really stood out to me today is just find the right partners. Finding the right partners in your projects leads to a tremendous amount of success, and reaching out to folks. We touched on it in a variety of different ways. And so, with that, I'll hand it to you to close us out.
Thanks. So I really like the parting words of wisdom. My three would be: learn from others, plan long-term, and experiment and learn. And on the learn from others, I'm really glad that we were able to do this podcast and hear from all of these experiences. I'm really glad that we have Evolve Houston on here. Evolve Houston has an educational mission. I think one thing that I'm hearing really clearly is that, education is needed, information is needed, data is needed. This is still an evolving space. And so it makes me really happy to see something like that. When it comes to planning long-term, understand that, your needs today are going to be different than your needs tomorrow. When I mentioned a utility that I work with on this, and we looked at, depending on how they design the program, their spending needs for the next 10 years could be 12 million or 3 million. That's a huge delta. And it all depends on how you design the program. And then sort of playing off of what Joseph said, experiment and learn. Like there's not just one way to do this, not just one solution. Some people will bring in a charger and own and operate it for you. You don't have to pay anything. And some have like a low cost option, and some have a really expensive option. And each one of those has its place. But you don't really know whether it's going to work for you until you've tested it on real users in a real program. So if you're at the beginning of the program, test some things out, see what works. If you're a utility who might end up spending, $3 to $12 million, let's test some stuff now. Figure out what works and what doesn't work, so that when we spend the big dollars, we know that we're doing it on stuff that is going to work well for everybody in the long term. So thanks, Joseph, for hosting us today. It was a pleasure to be on the podcast, and it was a pleasure to talk about workplace charging with all of the great minds here.
All right. Thank you so much to our listeners and subscribers for your time today. I hope this episode has brought to you a little more value to your day. I know we're all better for it. I love you. And yes, we can't do this episode without you. So thanks again. We appreciate you joining us today. Go ahead and click the thumbs up icon below, share, comment, subscribe to our channel if you think we earned it. And again, thanks for charging up again with us today. Keep in mind, you can always find us at smartchargeamerica.com. And remember, folks, if you can't charge, you can't drive. We'll see you next time. Cheers.